Oh, I didn't spell it right. Oh, I didn't spell it right. All right, freeing Pedestalia. This is one of our favourite subjects to discuss, isn't it, Steve? Something we need to remind ourselves of all the time. So hello, anybody who's watching this. And as it is one of Steve's favourite subjects to discuss, I'll hand it over to him straight away to invoke the conversation between us.
Thanks, Jules. And yes, it is not only a favourite subject to consider and review, but also that the constancy of keeping an eye on how we're going with it. The art of pedestalia is essentially either putting people above us on pedestals or below us on pedestals, or putting ourselves above other people or below other people. In either way, it doesn't really matter what was creating the pedestalia. The reality is we're kind of having our energy stuck around that. And that can come through, I wish I had that person's skill. They are so much better than I am, which is a generalization. If we were able to see inside all 7 point whatever billion people on this planet, we would see that all of us have things that we struggle with. All of us have things that we feel we're not as good as perhaps we'd like to be. We all have that. The constant reminder that we have need of is that, do we find ourselves putting ourselves above someone else, or saying, why should I listen to them? They're not as good as me. They're not as educated. They're not as skilled. They're not as experienced as me. Another way of saying that, of course, would then become and shift to, what if I listen to them because perhaps they have something that can help teach me? What if I was open enough to hear that from whatever source it comes? And that's the difference between having that closed perspective of saying, I'm better than them, or they're better than me, or even we're on the same equal footing. It's that closing off that causes us not to be open to hear what really is offering to speak to us. How often have we been moving in a certain direction or handling a project or task in a certain way, and then all of a sudden from somewhere or some source comes a little nudge to go in a different direction, which creates a much easier and a much better, and quite often a much different outcome. And we go, that was cool. And if we're open to it, we'll recognize that a nudge came to move us in a different direction that we would not of ourselves have chosen. And so releasing the energy around pedestalia, releasing rating or ranking people or ourselves, frees it up to be open to hear. And it's a really beautiful thing when we listen, because it's simple and it's easy. And we recognize that perhaps there's an old narrative or story playing out that we do not need to analyze. Just need to let it go, release it. And that helps create that openness for those nudges to come through more and more often. Yeah.
So it's more than just an inner listening or an outer listening. What I'm hearing you sharing there is the comparison model, comparing. For anybody who's aware, with the gifts work we do, this falls into the area of gifts distortion, and where we're isolating ourselves instead of being an open vessel of listening and being available for the moment. So in conversation, I know for me it's just being able to pull myself up in the moment taking a moment to breathe, let it sit, let the energy just settle. I wouldn't say I release it. I just let it settle and then dedicate myself to staying open. What do you do?
That's a good one, Jules. And I love what you said about letting the energy settle. For me, there are times when absolutely I can release it. It's like, I don't need to be attached to that. I don't need to have that distortion going on. And it will simply float away. The energy is released. There are other times when it's like it takes more pulling myself down to become grounded to be able to move forward in that non-judgmental way.
We never need the distortion.
No, we never.
That's the pedestalia. That's
yes.
the land we create in the narrative of, like you were saying before, about being better than or lesser than or whatever. As we gave it this name as giving it a continent, its own little place, its own little island. And essentially, we want to connect. That's essentially what our gifts genius does. It's automatically connected and we want to connect. And yet, what does distortion do in that power grab? It disconnects. And so we end up being isolated, and it has the reverse effect then of freeing. So, we've used the word freeing for a reason. I know we tend to default to the word release, and sometimes it can be tied to wrongness. I'm not saying you've got it tied to wrongness, Steve, but often we've got it tied to wrongness. This is wrong, so I need to release. They're all judgments, and they're distortions on ourselves. So they're the fingers pointing back at ourselves. And freeing means it's free. It's free to stay. Like if it's here, we're able to be with it as an adult and in the recognition of it. And as we know, it takes action. Awareness, one thing, as action is the next, but not from a wrong place, from a place of what's true to our values, and for me, it's very much around freedom, not freedom of the world, freedom within, freedom of fear within, freedom from controls within, all of those things that will keep me in a place of land of pedestalia, keeping me distance or keeping everybody at arm's length, which means my breath is stuck. Physiologically, I'm stuck. What's it like for you?
I would describe it as closed in or closed down for me. And we know about the finger pointing. Can I give that? Yeah, finger pointing. We also know about the open gesture, which is a more welcoming and more on all parties. It's like, hey, let's converse, let's talk, let's suspend judgments and the inner narrative I may have had going on. Let's just suspend that and let's see what evolves, what develops, what comes through. Moving to that place is for me really good. But sometimes I fight it. Yes. I go, but
that's a lifetime of fighting it. Just to give a bit more clarity, because we will talk about this more in another video, two concepts that Steve it's not two, it's actually around the one. As we point fingers out at something, I'm better than, I'm less than, there's three pointing back. So what I was discussing earlier in myself is that I am harsher on myself with those three fingers pointing back. So pedestalia would work in my inner conversation and my inner distortions more so than the outer distortions. So that's the one concept. The other is, which is the opening, the opening gesture that was being shown, in case the hands weren't seen very well. I'm not seeing them on my screen as well. You might be, Steve. So it's this openness. And if we've got the openness in our hands, our shoulders naturally go back, our chest opens up, our diaphragm opens up, our breath is getting inside our body. And pedestalia just can't exist because we're out of our head. Breath is in our body. We're giving our mind a job. So we can talk about that another time. Anything else about pedestalia? This is a little love touch, raw and real, raw and whatever we've called it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, for us to be able to share like this is really cool, because you get to see us as ordinary people. I'm not dressed in a business suit with a script and showing you how good or how professional or whatever I can be. It's like, no, I'm what's also known as human. And it's as humans that we connect. And we want to do these videos so that it can provide some support for someone along the way in their journey. And
nice.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep
no,
going.
no, that's fine. It's a privilege for us to do these videos. And as with all things, we may be sharing with you, we are also sharing with ourselves.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. So if you are listening, this is us inside as well. Farewell from me. Thank you.
And farewell from me. There we go.
Ciao.
Ciao.